Next thing, nucleic acids, yeah? So nucleic acids, that is the primarily, usually, informational molecules in cells, DNA, RNA, and then ATP. Those are your three major nucleic acids. DNA, as we've said, is the code to make a protein. Living things are made of protein, and that's why DNA is important. Okay. DNA is a polymer, just like proteins, just like polysaccharides, yeah? That means it is theoretically infinite, right? There's no real firm upper limit to how long a strand of DNA can be, right? DNA strands are never infinitely long, but they do not have a defined limit to how big they can be. If they're a particular size, they can always be one piece longer. So they're made out of pieces. The pieces of DNA are called nucleotides. They are the subunits, the monomers of nucleic acids. They themselves, nucleotides, are modular. They are made of interchangeable parts. We have three main parts here: a sugar, a phosphate group, a functional group, the phosphate group, yeah? And then this other part here called a nitrogenous base. It's nitrogenous because it has little nitrogen atoms in it, and it's a base, I think, because it's pH basic, but you better not quote me on that. There are four kinds of pieces of DNA. A's, C's, T's, and G's, and they're all different in the kind of base that they have. And I'm about to sneeze. Excuse me. So, A, T, C, and G are the four kinds of DNA nucleotides: adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. RNA is a different kind of nucleic acid, and it has a different kind of base in it. It has uracil, U, instead of thymine, T, but it does have the A's, C's, and G's, like DNA does. Okay. In DNA, adenine, A, always matches with thymine, T, A with T. Likewise, guanine always matches with cytosine, G with C. That is in DNA. DNA's structure is fundamental to its function as an information storage molecule. We'll talk about this more in Chapter 8. But basically, if we're storing information, we're storing it as sequences of A, C, G's, and T's as we go down one side of a DNA double helix. Do you see that? What holds the two strands together, the A with the T and the C with the G? What are these little dots here? Those are hydrogen bonds, right? And hydrogen bonds can be broken. In DNA, they can be broken with heat. They can also be broken enzymatically, and that's the way it happens in your body, but we'll talk about that later on, right? So these hydrogen bonds are pretty important because they are individually weak. They are not that strong, one hydrogen bond, but as it turns out, there's two hydrogen bonds holding A's to T's. There's three hydrogen bonds holding any C to any G. And we have a sequence of potentially hundreds or thousands of base pairs in a strand of DNA. So it's kind of like a zipper with thousands of little zips, right? One little zip is weak, but many zips in a whole zipper holds your jacket together pretty securely. Yeah? You guys convinced by my analogy there? Okay, so how do we get the plan to make a particular protein? Well, it's the sequence of A's, C's, G's, and T's in one strand, kind of like computers use a sequence of information, right? Well, computers depend on what kind of information? Ultimately, your computer program, when I open Microsoft PowerPoint or Microsoft Word, what does the processor actually look at? It looks at what's called binary. Raise your hand if you've heard of binary code, right? And binary is just nothing but ones and zeros, right? A sequence of ones and zeros. How many people know that computers basically run on ones and zeros? Hopefully most of you understand that, yeah? So in the same way that computers run on ones and zeros, your cells run on A's, C's, G's, and T's. Does that make sense? So it's not quite a binary code. I guess, what would you say that would be? Quaternary, right? Because there's four bases instead of 2 numbers, yeah? But it's the same basic idea. A sequence of ones and zeros tells the computer to open a PowerPoint or to play a video game or do whatever, yeah? A sequence of A's, C's, G's, and T's tells a cell to make a particular protein, whether that protein is hemoglobin or insulin or whatever. Got it? All right. So, sequence is the information. The sequence of ones and zeros is the information for the computer. The sequence of A's, C's, G's, and T's is the information for the DNA. Hydrogen bonds hold it together. We talked about that. And again, DNA carries the information to make the proteins. So this picture, if you understand this picture, this is an important picture. It's not critical right now, but knowing this is essential for the class, yeah? DNA information is converted into messenger RNA information. That information is used to make proteins. What are these little purple balls here in this thing that says proteins? Those are the individual amino acids that a protein is made out of, yeah? Okay. So, some other stuff, because DNA is the code to make you, right? What would we say? Am I related to you guys? Yeah, we talked about that phylogenetic tree of life, right? We are all related pretty darn closely in the grand scheme of things, right? Does that mean we're exactly the same? No. If I look at my DNA versus Xiao Xiao's DNA, right, it will be similar, but it won't be the same, yeah? And insofar as Xiao Xiao and I are slightly different, our DNA will be slightly different. Does that make sense? Likewise, if there's something that's very different, like the mushrooms I keep talking about, yeah? Mushrooms, my DNA will be a lot more different from mushrooms than it will be from Xiao Xiao. Does that make sense? Guys with me? Right? So DNA sequence similarities show phylogenetic relationships between species, right? So these species are presumably a lot more closely related than the 3 branches of the phylogenetic tree of life. But what we're looking at here is a phylogenetic tree, yeah? How do they make phylogenetic trees? All phylogenetic trees, pretty much. The vast majority of phylogenetic trees these days are made by comparing sequences of DNA. The more similar 2 creatures' DNA is, the more similar species A is to species B, the more closely related they are. Does that make sense? Guys with me? And so by comparing sequences of DNA, we can take these sequences of DNA, feed them to a computer, and by having the computer compare these sequences to each other, we can make a phylogenetic tree. And we can say that species C and D are a lot more similar, right? They have how many differences between each other? I don't see. Oh, it looks like C and D are exactly identical in this list, yeah? But how many differences between B and C? Well, we've got 1 difference here, 2 differences here, 3 differences here, 4 differences here. So 0 differences between C and D, 4 differences between B and C. And as we can see, C and B are much more distantly related. Guys got that? Okay. All right. So how did living things get to be different? Well, your DNA gets changed. And when your DNA gets changed, your proteins get changed, right? All mutations are changes in DNA, and so we can get this phylogenetic tree from changes in DNA, and we can generate phylogenetic trees by comparing DNA. Okay. All right. So, moving on. RNA is another critical nucleic acid, and we'll talk a lot more about RNA again in Chapter 8. Again, it has a few key differences. DNA is a double helix. RNA is generally single-stranded. DNA has one job, and that's to store information. RNA has many jobs, many roles, and many forms. There's more than one kind of RNA. There's tRNA. Who knows what that is? Transfer RNA. How many people have heard of transfer RNA? Many, not all. Okay. mRNA, what's that? Messenger. More people have heard of messenger RNA. rRNA, anyone know that one? Ribosomal RNA. Very nicely done. How many people did not know ribosomal RNA? So that's a third kind of RNA and there's a lot more. Yeah? Is that clear? Okay. So DNA, one job, store information. RNA, many jobs. Okay. In fact, RNA has so many jobs and is so versatile that it's often thought that when life originally formed, right, spontaneous generation was true one time in the history of life on Earth, yeah? Life happened once, as far as we know. When it did, RNA was there. Arguably, possibly, DNA was not, right? Perhaps RNA is essential for life, and then DNA was something that life picked up a few years after getting its start, right? So the sequence of events would be RNA, then life, and then we'll pick up DNA because it's useful and durable. But DNA was not there at the start. It is often thought. That is a very popular and powerful theory. Okay, so this codon chart, this is a very critical thing that, again, we'll be looking at more in Chapter 8, but this codon chart is common to all life. This is how DNA gets turned into protein, and it gets turned into the protein pretty much the same way for all life on Earth, and that's important. Okay, so much for DNA, so much for RNA. There's one more molecule of one more nucleic acid that is important, and that's ATP. ATP is the basic energy currency for all cells. Hopefully you guys learned a lot about ATP in physio class, yeah? Raise your hand if you heard about ATP in physio class. You understand why it's a currency. Can someone explain the concept of a currency? The concept of a currency is not something that I made up. It's something that I was taught when I was sitting in chairs like the ones you're sitting in, and the person who taught me heard it from somebody else. The analogy of currency is the analogy pretty much every biology teacher uses, because that is it's understandable and it's accurate. It's a very accurate analogy for the situation. Can someone explain how ATP is like a currency? It's constantly being exchanged. Is that true? Yeah. So it's an energy. So first of all, what does currency mean? When you think currency, what do you think? Money, yeah? So it's the energy money. Where does our energy come from? Where does our energy come from? Where do the energy that is keeping you conscious, where does that come from? Sugars, the food you eat, right? You had breakfast this morning, and because you had calories in your breakfast, you had energy to stay awake. Does that make sense? Right? All right. Well, but when your muscles move, right, your muscles are not, there's not little pieces of fried egg exploding in my bicep here, yeah? Right? So we take our pieces of fried egg and we hand them to our mitochondria, and our mitochondria takes the energy in the covalent bonds that holds together the pieces of fried egg, breaks those apart, the energy is released, and that energy is used to make ATP, and that ATP is used to move my bicep. Is that clear? All right. In the same way that your efforts to do your job are not rewarded by your bosses with cheeseburgers and so on. They're rewarded with money. Yeah? And the reason for that is because money is accepted everywhere. In the same way, ATP is accepted all over your body, right? If your muscles need to move, ATP moves them. If your brain needs to think, ATP provides us the energy to think. Yeah? Guys with me here? All right. How many basic monomers are found in proteins? 20? What if I said how many basic monomers are found in DNA? 4 would be the answer, yeah? Okay. All right, well that's chapter 2.